Have to unmute. I'm here. Good morning and welcome to Jim Dexter's. Been a while.
Jim Kochifer.
Morning all, I'm here.
Paul Maloka.
Here.
Tanya Pazlowski.
Here. Good morning.
Good morning, Tanya. Evans, already spoken. Bill Rustum.
Here.
Dan Scripps.
Present.
Dr. Stan Vitton.
Vitan, present.
Vitan, I'll get that right. We'll never make that mistake again. Abby Watkins.
Here.
And Glenn Wazorek.
Here.
So Eb and I have everyone present except for Brett Fessels.
Morning. I am present.
Good morning, Brett. Everyone is present.
Great, thanks. Well, I really appreciate everybody taking the time to show up today, both our panel as well as everybody who's joining in from the outside. The format of today's meeting, summary overview for those who are joining. We're going to hear an overview of the summary of the report from the Association of Dam Safety Officials. I believe that report's going to be released today. And then our group is going to have some question and answer back and forth to make sure that we understand the gist of what's being said. I'll ask Director Clark Liesel if you have anything to add just on the format side of things.
The only thing I would remind folks is that this is a public meeting. The public meeting is being recorded so that we can post it later. There will be an opportunity for the task force to have back and forth. And if there are questions from the community, that's something you can raise during the public comments, but those are things that public comment session is not for questioning of the task force members or of ASDSO. So happy to facilitate that in another way. We do have an email address that folks are welcome to use. So I think that's all I've got in addition. Thanks, Evan.
Yeah, sounds good. If any questions do come up in public comment, though, of course, they will be on the record and we'll be able to take a look at if we're able to answer those. And again, for our guests joining us on the phone, I think most people have been on the call, but just for housekeeping, *6 to mute and unmute if you're on the phone. And when we do get to the public comment, the *9 will be the feature you can use to raise your hand. So with that, we'll move forward to approval of the agenda. I would receive a motion and support on that. Just say your name if you're motioning it, your last name.
Douglas Chester.
All right. Support for approval of the agenda from anyone? Catch that, John? Motion to approve the agenda on the floor has been seconded. Anything anyone wants to add or had hoped to see on the agenda? If not, all in favor say aye.
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 Great.
Aye.
And those opposed to adopting the agenda, same sign. Seeing none, the agenda has been adopted. We've also got the draft minutes that were sent out a couple of days ago. Hopefully people had a chance to take a good look at those. I know we covered a lot of ground there, but I will take a motion to get those on the floor, and then if there's any changes we can discuss.
Douglas Chester.
All right, support?
Mindy Bacon.
Thank you. All right, we've got a motion and support on the minutes. Again, we covered a lot of ground. There's a lot of words there. Did anybody see anything that needs to be modified, changed, what have you?
Evan.
Yes.
Hi, this is Paul Maloka. I had one thing on page 2, second paragraph. It states, in advance of the meeting, the task force was provided the Eagle report to the governor on preliminary report on Edenville Dam failure. I have that now, but I do not believe that I received that before the meeting. Maybe others have, but I don't have a record of getting that in advance of the meeting. And the minutes state that it was given to us in advance of the meeting.
I thought that was emailed out in the original email with the agenda, but we can go back and look at that, Paul. It might have been a hyperlink, which is why, it might have not been an attachment, but we can absolutely modify.
Okay, it's not a big deal. If others have it, then, I'll withdraw my objection. I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Yeah, Paul, this is John Broshek. In my review of the minutes prior to them being posted, I did extensively review that in advance. I can't remember if it was part of the meeting notice, but it was available to us. And again, we can clarify that if we need to.
Great. Anything else? Any other comments? If not, all in favor of approving the minutes as presented, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Same sign? Great. The minutes have been formally adopted and those will end up getting posted to the website. And just so people know too, I can't recall what the number is on the executive order now. We've all been on Zoom calls. Most of us have probably been on calls where you're voting about things. The text of the executive order does say that it's okay to take a voice vote, but if it's close or if it is, let's say, an important decision, it recommends taking a roll call vote. So I'm not anticipating much in the way of roll call voting as we go, but just for anyone who's listening, we are trying to follow all the rules, regulations, and procedures. With that, we are on to 10:10 a.m. We are on time. Thank you, everyone. And I will turn it over to Director Clark for task force business.
Great, thank you, Evan. Just wanted to make sure that I had updated all of you with some of the ongoings from an Eagle perspective around what we've been moving forward in the dam safety area. So a few things. The first is on the important topic of Edenville, which is not the only thing we're here to talk about, but I know something that is really, really important to the work of the task force. I wanted to mention that the state of Michigan continues to move forward with making sure that we're assuring public safety in that area, primarily around the remaining structure on the Tobacco River side. And so we had entered emergency order and had been in a bit of a discussion in front of the courts around implementing that emergency order. Boyce on Monday or Tuesday early this week waived their right to do that work. And so that work will be done by the state. There has been correspondence between, a lot of collaboration between Eagle and MDOT. AECom is the contractor who's been helping with the design work there. And then there have been every other week meetings with local units of government to make sure that we are staying closely linked with what the locals are seeing on the ground. We will also do a public meeting in the next couple of weeks as it becomes clear what the construction steps will be to make sure that's fully communicated with the community as well. The intent is to do construction work here in the fall to make sure that we are doing everything we can from a public safety perspective before we get into spring storms. And of course, you know, we're contemplative of fall frost and freezing, so wanting to move with some level of haste. So wanted to update everyone on that. Before I keep going, any questions for me there?
No questions, but Liesl, I will just comment. I know everybody on the call probably understands you can go to the Eagle website and go get updates or fetch updates on dam safety just by typing dam safety in the search box. But if people are not aware, you can. There's also a box you can tick to get press releases and updates from Eagle. If, like me, it's hard for you to remember which sites you need to visit to check on what's happening. So what Liesl described has been put out in a formal press release, and there have been a number of press releases related to the, Edenville specifically. But I'll turn it back over to you, Liesl.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. Really good additions. A lot of this type of material ends up right on our front page too, as well as we communicate it through Twitter. And so we've got a Twitter box there. So hopefully there's a lot of ways to get the material out, but I appreciate you reemphasizing because it can be hard to make sure we're hitting all those communication methods. So just a couple of other quick things. As Evan said earlier today, we're going to have a presentation by the Association of State Dam Safety Officials on their program review that they did for Eagle. And I just wanted to say before we get into that, how much I really sincerely appreciate the work of that team. It was a lot of long hours, not only on their side, but then also I appreciate the work of the Eagle team to be forthcoming and provide all the information that was requested. This is a very important opportunity for us to kind of shine a mirror on ourselves. And we know that what we're seeing is due to a real lack of funding over time. But we think that there's already been some strides taken and there's much more work to do. But we think that it's just important to understand kind of that 360 approach and really be able to look at ourselves and see where, we need to do better. So looking forward to this discussion here today. The report will be sent to all of you and also released, be posted on our website. It might be there already. So we're in the process of taking care of those steps. In addition to the ASDSO report that is being made public today, I wanted to mention there was a lot of interest in the 2006 report, which is also up on our website. So you can have a chance to take a look at that as well. And then our team, through conversations and listening to all of you in the last meeting, as well as just through the deep expertise that we've got from an Eagle perspective, we've been consolidating documents that we think you might be interested in. So that would be just a little bit of extra fun reading for all of you. Not anything that's necessary, but something to just support the conversations that are happening here. And so we will continue to make materials like that available as the team thinks about, what might be useful and as we listen to what you're interested in focusing on. So before I turn it back to Evan, just wanted to also mention that, as I said in the last task force meeting, we were bringing on some help to support the structure and moving forward of this group. And so public sector consultants has been brought on board. Julie Bennett is with us, as is Elizabeth, whose last name I can't remember off the top of my head. And so they are going to guide us after the ASDSO discussion to having more kind of thought process as to how we want to focus our work. So ASDSO obviously has already done a lot of work, and we want to move towards a series of recommendations from this task force. So using the principle of beginning with the end in mind, we want to think about, after we hear what ASDSO has already done, we want to think about, what are additional pieces that we want to take from what they've done and flesh out further. So Julie's going to help us as a task force think about how do we come up with, 2 to 3 main topics where we're going to want to focus our time. We don't have infinite time. We don't have infinite dollars. And we do really want to get to concrete recommendations that we can help move forward. So that'll be happening as well. So I think that's all I've got, unless there's any questions for me.
All right.
Okay. Thank you, Evan.
Sure. Sorry, did somebody have a question? Okay. So I think we're on to our big moment. I can't recall if the bios for the folks who have done this peer review work are online or not. I know I've seen them. I have a hard time remembering where I've seen all the information. But in lieu of that, I think I'll allow for self-introductions here if we're ready to get started on that report.
Oh, there's all kinds of people here.
Oops.
I don't know if they can hear you.
If everybody can remember to mute themselves, that'd be awesome.
Yep. So I'm not sure if you wanted to have a staff member. Lisa will introduce our guests here today, or if they're ready to just take it away.
I think they're ready to take it away. I know that our team has had lots of conversations about helping them kind of think about what was going to be a great way to do it concisely for all of you. So I know they're ready to run. Okay,
I'll turn over the floor right now. Thank you.
Okay, this is Bob Dalton. I'm in Illinois. So welcome to our report out. Bill Bingham and Ken Smith are with me today online. I've seen them here already. And Bill's going to do most of we've got a PowerPoint presentation available that Bill's going to run through. My background is in the Illinois Dam Safety Program. Worked for the state for about 31 years and am now in private practice. Bill, you want to talk about you a little bit?
Why don't we let Ken go first?
Okay.
And then I'll start and then just keep going.
Okay, my name's Ken Smith, and I'm a civil engineer. Been with the Indiana Department of Natural Resources for 44 years now. working in dam safety for more than 25 years. I'm the past president of ASDSO, and I'm currently at DNR, the assistant director of the Division of Water. Bill?
All right. Great. Thank you, Ken. And I'm going to turn my camera off so that there are no distractions. My kids told me a long time ago I have a face for radio, so I'm going to turn camera off. And I've got to take a moment here to also share my desktop. And I think I'm sharing my desktop. But what I'm not seeing is it large on the screen. I don't know if there's something else I should be doing. Perhaps you can let me know when you see the desktop.
We will. We're still looking for it. We'll give you a minute or two to get set up.
Okay.
No pressure.
Okay. Do you see it?
Not yet.
This is that moment you talked about at the beginning, I guess.
Correct. It's okay. We'll worry about all that. You just stick with your.
Actually did a run with Luke yesterday, and
Yeah.
it worked perfect.
Could Luke help us? I know Luke's on. Luke, I don't know if you're able to give us some insight. You're good at the screen sharing.
Sure. Bill, do you have the open share tray open?
Yep.
The rectangle with the up arrow. Then there should be one that
it's
you want
it
to
says share desktop, and I've clicked that. So
okay.
And I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it appear, and it might be because I'm running on a Mac. But let me look into that.
And you've already clicked on the document you want to share also once you got your desktop up there?
Yep. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Let me do
Luke, do you have the presentation? Do you want to share it?
I don't. If you want to email it to me, Bill, I can bring it up and
Yeah.
you can just say next slide.
Yeah.
So bear
Let
with
me
us.
look here. It's kind of strange, Luke. I got this time when I clicked it, it got download the Mac app, and I didn't get that yesterday when I was talking with you.
Yeah.
And now I did, and I'm looking at what I ought to do. Okay,
Yep.
let's see.
This is
I'm
Murphy's Law.
installing it. Yeah, I don't know why.
So while we're waiting, does somebody from the ASDSO peer review team want to send me the slide deck just as a backup in case Bill can't get up and running in the next minute here? I'll do a real quick test to make sure I can share my screen, and then we'll just have that as a backup. And the rest of you bear with us for a minute and apologize for the delay.
Yep, we can see it, Luke.
You can see my don't criticize me for all the desktop
Holy
icons.
cow.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing. So
Looks like you could play Space Invaders with that screen there.
I know I should have put up like a nice picture before I shared my screen, right?
Well,
all right. So I guess Bill, if you can't get it going here in the next minute, just send me the slide deck and I'll bring it up on my screen.
The organizers got to greet me. There, something's happening.
Hey, all right, we see it.
You got it.
You got it. You've got the whole thing, and now we're in moving to presentation mode.
Yep.
Sorry about that that delay.
Thank you for helping us restore public confidence that this isn't something that's all been scripted ahead of time, Bill.
That's
Good
true.
job.
True.
We
This
appreciate
looks like live, but bad TV. You've already met Bob Dalton. You should be seeing the screen that says IRP members. And Bob Dalton is our team lead. He's already introduced himself. Ken has as well. I'm the retired practice leader for our national practice leader for dams at Gannett Fleming. And I was on the National Dam Safety Review Board for a number of years and a past president of United States Society on Dams. Spent 50 years at Gannett Fleming, so I'm retired. I'm the old guy. And you've already met Ken. Who you haven't heard from is Denny Dickey. Dennis cannot be with us today. He had a long-standing commitment, but he's the former head of dam safety at Pennsylvania, and he was also on the California DWR ODSP, which is an acronym for Owner Dam Safety Program Audit Team, and he was also the lead on the DHS dams team. Let me move ahead. I'd like to say before getting into the report, I wanted to talk a little bit about ASDSO for any of you who are listening that are not familiar with ASDSO. ASDSO was founded in 1984, and its mission is to improve the safety of dams through education and assistance to the states and the state's dam safety program, fostering a unified dam safety community across the United States. In 1988, this is where the state peer review program lands within ASDSO and all the things that they do. But I would say that in 1988, they performed its first peer review of a dam safety program. Actually in 89, I guess it was 88, we launched the program and did the first review in 89. Since then, we've done 49 state dam safety reviews. Some of those are states that we've done more than once. We've done 18 federal agency reviews and 5 dam owner organizations. By the way, Michigan had a review previous to this, I believe in 2006. The peer review program maintains a panel of 24, actually 25 now. We just added one person yesterday. And they typically, the teams that do the peer reviews have the 3 different legs that I consider to be the support for the program. That is a state or a federal regulator, a consultant, and a dam owner. The 3 parts that are really almost always active in a dam safety program, wherever it is. We evaluate the dam safety program relative to the agency's governing regulations. We also compare it to the Model Dam Safety Program, which is a program that ASDSO put together a number of years ago. We also look at it in comparison to commonly accepted standards of practice in the industry. We completed the Michigan Dam Safety Peer Review in September of this year. And I understand from comments earlier that it's going to be made available today publicly. I do want to say on behalf of the team, and I think I can speak for the whole team here, that it was the most unusual yet detailed peer review of a state program that ASDO's ever performed. The team spent probably more than 900 hours. We didn't keep track of our hours. These are all volunteer people that serve on the peer review teams. But we estimate about 900 hours. And that doesn't count the hours spent, of course, by the Michigan DSP, Dam Safety Program staff, nor ASDSO. And they assisted us tremendously throughout the effort here. So I want to shout out to Lori Spraggins, the Executive Director of ASDSO, Brittany Lewis, and Caitlin Riley at ASDSO for their help in organizing a lot of the Zoom meetings that we used for interviews, and also for just general support as well as final editing of the report. So thanks to them. We've included a list of acronyms in the appendix to the report, by the way. I'll try not to use too many of the acronyms that we're all familiar with. When I say we, I mean the people that are involved in dam safety every day. But DSP refers to the Dam Safety Program, the Model Dam Safety Program, MDSP. Just be aware that we have those acronyms, and we'll try and call them out whenever we can. I want to talk first about the executive summary that's contained in the report. And what we put in the executive summary generally was all the recommendations that the team wanted to emphasize as most important, things that we didn't want to be, that we didn't think would be looked at, perhaps if somebody had to pore through the entire report. But we wanted to say that we found that the current staff is doing the very best job they can. They're well experienced, they're good engineers. We know that they have limited resources and time available, but they're doing the best they can. Perhaps the most outstanding finding was that we found that the program is significantly understaffed to perform the mission, as even dictated by the legislation rules and certainly best practice in the industry. We're making recommendations to increase staffing, actually by 9 or to 9 professionals. We'll tell you more about that later. Another finding was Michigan has, as a state, and I'm not talking about the Dam Safety Program or Eagle, I'm saying Michigan has not invested in the safety of its dams for many decades, regardless of who owns those dams. Those needs have accumulated over the years, just like they have in every state, and they pose a risk to the environment, the ecology, all the people that live downstream. It's a public safety issue. We found no revolving loan program exists in Michigan to fund dam rehabilitations. Some states have this. It's not uniform across the United States, but some states have that, and that's a tremendous aid to getting rehabilitation accomplished. We found that rigorous enforcement is seldom used for dam safety violations. There seems to be a minimal enforcement culture that's grown in Michigan. And the corollary to that is dam safety violations without strong enforcement do expose those living downstream to the consequences of dam failure. And we understand that you know full well what that means. Michigan's dam inventory is aging well beyond their intended design life, like it is everywhere across the United States. And one of the things that dam owners, and this is pretty uniform across the country, owners of high hazard dams have not been required to perform detailed engineering evaluations of their dams. All federal agencies that own dams are required by the federal guidelines to do detailed, deep dive, periodic investigations and reevaluations of their dams. They've been doing that for years. And we're going to recommend that be undertaken by Michigan. DSP doesn't seem to be a vital component of Eagle, based on where it is in the organization and as evidenced by the mission statement. I will say I was happy to see that there is an icon link to the dam safety program now, and so progress already. We know there are 92 hydro dams in Michigan that are regulated by FERC. There's no duplicative regulatory authority regarding hydropower dams, and Michigan has recently experienced one of the negatives of not really doing that dual regulation. When you wanted to get information on the failed FERC regulated dam, and the transfer of files became problematic. You're not alone. There are other states that have experienced similar things, and we're recommending that the dam safety program work with ASDSO and leadership of FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to do a system-wide simplification of this information transfer problem. I'd like to, that's all the things that we covered in the at the front of the report, but I'd like to get into the body of the report now and talk about the formal recommendations. You'll see some that are numbered. Well, you see all of them are numbered, but some of those numbered recommendations are shown in red and they're marked with an asterisk. Those are ones that may require a change in legislation or rule, and we put that in there just based on what we know would have to happen. I'm going to review a lot of the recommendations, but not all of them. We've also put the recommendations not only in the body of the report, but also in an appendix, Appendix N to the report. You'll find Appendix N1 and N2. And so we'll talk more about N1 and N2 later, but we've grouped these recommendations by dam safety program components. And by that, I mean like legislation. You see at the top there, 2020-01 legislation and authority. That's the component of a dam safety program. And we're saying, you know, provided in the change in laws, provide a liability disclaimer for your staff. Require permits for existing unpermitted dams. You don't do that currently. Require the owner to maintain dam operation monitoring and maintenance records so that the dam safety program can access those. Provide proof of financial responsibility or security in the way of a bond or cash to assure that there's funds available for the continued safe operation and maintenance of the dam, and to be available for the dam safety program to access to mitigate any hazard presented by a dam incident. Require the inspection of construction by the staff as well as the owner. Require a first filling plan. We understand that sometimes you do get a first filling plan under a broad authority interpretation of your legislation, but we think it should be spelled out. We think the regs ought to also spell out that EAPs have got to be exercised regularly. Your design floods are really not in accordance with the model dam safety program and what is commonly practiced across the country. We're going to make recommendations that you meet the design floods and the frequency, the inspection frequency, as further discussed in the recommendation 2012-12A. And we'll talk more about that. We're recommending that you create a dam safety emergency fund. Make sure that that doesn't revert back to the general fund at the end of budget cycles. That fund, the purpose of that fund is to mitigate any hazard present during an incident or an emergency like Edenville. Should the owner fail to act in a timely way, it would give Michigan the funds to act in a timely way and eliminate any hazard to downstream property and the environment. We recommend that you ought to consider this duplicative regulatory authority for hydropower dams. It's going to increase your workload, so you need to consider that carefully with regard to the benefits that you'd gain from that additional work. Provide for future inflation. Write that into your regs so that your fees don't become outdated fast. Under program management, we found a lot of, we really have proffered a lot of recommendations under program management. One of the things that we've written about in the report is the position description. We think it needs to be modified. The Dam Safety Program Manager position is so critical. This is the person that provides the vision, the management, the mentoring, initiatives, QA for the program, and all of the other things that he does. It's a full-time job. This is a full-time job for the individual. That person should have technical experience in the design, construction, operation, and maintenance of dams. He's going to be charged with overall program management, mentoring. I'm going to stop him here for a second. Developing a portfolio risk assessment. If these recommendations were adopted, one of the first things he would probably do is lead the effort to do a portfolio risk assessment of Michigan's inventory of regulated dams. This would then be used to set a lot of the dam safety program priorities moving forward. He would do the annual, he or she would do the annual report. That manager does performance reviews. He's the person that would do a dam safety awareness program within the department. The development of the budget request falls under his purview. Tracking inspections, training of staff, enforcement actions, making sure that the quality control is practiced throughout the organization, and then developing relationships both within Eagle and outside. He would develop the policies and the procedures manual. That person would lead dam safety initiatives and participate in professional societies. Another key thing that person should be spending time on in the early years moving forward is trying to establish some kind of revolving loan program to fund rehabilitation of high hazard dams. Our experience is that where there's a program like that, a revolving loan program or a financing program, that's when dam safety programs really have the most success in getting rehabilitation and addressing dam safety violations. The owners need some form of financing. There are many states that have it, and ASDSO can help you in looking at where that's been done before. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. That person should be scheduling periodic dam safety program meetings to discuss overarching issues. This isn't for the regular meetings that are called on an incident or an event, but a routine meeting to discuss overarching issues within the dam safety program. The annual report, adopting this risk-based approach. A portfolio risk assessment is so critical to management of a dam safety program when you've got such a large inventory like Michigan does. You need to know where you're going to get the biggest return for the dam safety dollars that you have to expend. Some states have done it over the years based on gut feelings and knowing their dams. But if you do a risk-based portfolio risk assessment program exercise, you'll have guidance then to see where you want to spend your time and your money. Developing that QA/QC program, developing a policies and procedures manual so that the new people that come into the program can pick up one document that's basically codifies all your policies and procedures in one place. He or she doesn't have to go out looking for those things. Developing a recommendation for this revolving loan program. Those are all the things that come under that dam safety program manager. It's a big job. Under resource allocation, we recommend that you obtain some proprietary software in specific engineering fields such as H&H, geotechnical, structural, CAD, and so forth, and identify those needs. One of the largest or I think most significant recommendations that we're making is that the dam safety program should be in a standalone unit directly under the field operations support section. Based on ASDSO's findings regarding the DSP, the staffing should consist of the manager along with 3 senior, 3 junior, 1 engineering technician, as well as clerical support. And we'll show you an org chart for that. We've included it in the report in Appendix K. In addition, there would be 2 dedicated dam safety enforcement officers. Here's the org chart. Probably shows up on your screen pretty small, but I will say this, that it includes, coming from the top in the black box is the support section. Beneath that, the dam safety unit. And then that leads down to the direct reports with the clerical and the engineering technician and the blue boxes off to the side. And then the 3 senior dam safety engineer positions and 3 junior dam safety engineer positions. Appendix K has a description of how the MDSP, that is the Model Dam Safety Program, would arrive at the recommended number of FTEs or full-time equivalent staff that would be necessary for the program. And that calculation is presented in the appendix. So you'll be able to take a look at that. Funding and budgeting, we recommend you restrict the use of the annual FEMA dam safety grant funds solely for enhancement of the program, not for dam safety program salaries. Consider input from the dam safety program manager. We recommend that dam safety owner agencies, that is those state organizations that own dams, lead by example. We haven't found that there's a lot to give us confidence that this has happened, but this could start with an inventory-wide assessment of state-owned dams, then setting the financial and project goals to provide the adequate yearly and the life cycle cost resources to perform the maintenance and rehabilitation that may be found there. A change to the rules and legislation might be required, but we recommend you to designate a portion of that dam permit application fees and the renewal fees to this dam safety emergency fund. That's the fund that's going to be used to mitigate hazards that occur from time to time. Excuse my errant finger here. We're recommending that you develop a dam safety program succession plan. That's under the purview of executive management within Eagle. We think there needs to be a development of an annual training plan and budget to ensure continued professional growth. A technical engineering career path is always problematic for any organization, whether it's a state program or whether it's a private consulting firm or an owner. There are a lot of people that want to remain technical, but they don't see a career path. So they have to get out of the technical side. We recommend you have a technical engineering career path for many of the engineering positions. Try and maintain interest and keep those people. Don't let them get away from you. We know that the dam safety program manager position description should be revised to include a lot of the things that I've already talked about, but that experience in dams. Develop and a plan to track the professional development hours that all the staff have. Under permitting, develop a more inclusive list of calculations and documents that should be provided by a dam owner, regardless of who the application is. This would help with consistency of the program. Develop requirements for the dam owner of low and significant dams to address the potential change in hazard classification. In other words, requiring those people that own those dams to look at those dams periodically and to make sure there isn't hazard creep. That is, that a low hazard dam, because of development downstream, hasn't become significant or significant become high. Under design reviews, consider every 4 years awarding an engineering services contract to a qualified firm to augment the safety program staff when needed. That can be used for just different events that overburden the staff, complex design review where you don't have the expertise, specific expertise resident within the program, performing dam inspections to get them done timely, construction assurance reviews, and these very important periodic 10-year detailed dam reevaluations. Require owners of dams, of complex dams, to provide an independent board of review when they submit a dam rehabilitation or a new dam design for approval. They ought to, on the dam safety program, ought to have the ability to require them to appoint an independent board of review to oversee the owner's design. We think you should develop a standard format engineering report for all of these construction, rehab, operation, and maintenance dams in the state. One of the most critical, I think, recommendations is we will recommend this not only in Michigan, but to virtually every state dam safety program, that they consider adopting a high and significant hazard dam owners program that would require them to have periodic, independent, comprehensive reviews of their dams by a qualified team with the appropriate expertise. And these would be done on maybe a max 10-year cycle, periodic cycle. The first ones would be determined by this risk performed portfolio risk assessment that we talked about earlier. Out of that portfolio risk assessment, you'll identify the most troubling dams, and you could work on those initially. On inspections, we recommend that annual inspection frequencies be adopted for high hazard dams. You're not doing that currently. And biannually for significant hazard dams. We recommend that you establish a construction inspection requirement for both the design engineer and the DSP staff people. That's not contained in the regs at the current time. Develop an inspection checklist or a standard report form. Do frequent inspections during construction. alteration or repair or the first filling. I know that you have more small and medium-sized dams in Michigan than you do large dams, but consider as appropriate requiring the installation of surveillance monitoring equipment, piezometers, inclinometers, settlement gauges, and so forth. And the regular submittal of that monitoring analysis to the dam safety program on an annual basis. When the owner does the annual inspection report, should be submitting this analysis of the surveillance monitoring data. We recommend several things with regard to compliance and enforcement. A very critical part of the dam safety program. We recommend that senior management lead the priority for portfolio-wide compliance enforcement. You can, again, use that list that you come up with out of your portfolio risk assessment. That's going to help identify the most problematic dams, and that will allow you to then develop your enforcement priority list. We recommend you conduct a monthly compliance and enforcement triage meeting. That's where senior management, along with the DSP and the legal counsel, go over that list of, I'll call them bad actors, that list of troubled dams, the most problematic structures, so that everybody is on board on a routine basis. Develop and adapt a written policy for violation management. One thing that you haven't done with regularity in the past is utilization of water level lowering orders as a compliance tool to, let's say, encourage unresponsive dam owners to doing what they should do to respond to violence, violations of their dam safety issues. With regard to compliance and enforcement, we recommend that you implement a Dam Safety 101 and enforcement cross-training program so that the dam safety program staff and the enforcement staff know what the others are doing, at least on the basics. This is going to allow them to both have an appreciation for what the others are trying to accomplish. The penalties or fines, they should go to the Dam Emergency Fund. With regard to EAPs, we didn't find that you have a specific dam safety program, general dam emergency response plan. We think you should. Specifically for dam hazard emergencies, this could be coordinated with the Eagle Emergency Response Manager, the Dam Safety Program, representatives of the state, local, and local emergency response officials. And this would outline the responsibilities of each so that there's no
Bill, I think you were accidentally muted. Bill, can you hear me? I think you are muted.
Hey, Bill, we're not hearing you.
No. We're still.
Can you click the unmute microphone button, Bill? Should be on your taskbar at the bottom.
We're still struggling.
Is the host able to unmute?
There we go.
There, are you, now can you
Yes.
hear me?
Yep.
All right, Luke, can you tell me where I went quiet? Sorry.
It wasn't very long. It
Okay.
maybe 15 seconds before you started hearing us.
Go one more slide back.
Okay. Emergency response,
Yeah, we heard
Yep,
you
right
talking about
there.
emergency response.
compliance enforcement. Okay.
No, you were through the first, halfway through the first slide on emergency response.
Okay.
So you got
All
through
right.
the general emergency response plan.
Okay. You know what probably happened? My mouse wandered down to that little black box that I got, and I probably hit that. I'm sorry. But let me go into beyond compliance into emergency response. We didn't find that there was a dam safety program specific general emergency response plan, and we recommend that you have one. And this is developed in concert with all the stakeholders, both within Eagle and also outside of Eagle in the county and the state and so forth. But that would then list what everybody's job is in the event of an emergency. The EAP should be checked annually and then updated. We recommend that you develop a standardized EAP format so that every owner knows what they should be doing with regard to their EAPs. And then there would be consistency, both advantageous to both the dam safety program and the local emergency responders. Require testing, either tabletop or a full scale, functional or full scale, as agreed upon by everybody. Under files and records, we think your filing system's really pretty good based on everything we were shown. We know that you're considering a cloud-based system, and we encourage that you continue all the work that you're doing along those lines, and also continue your efforts towards moving to your inventory to a GIS-based data system. That'd be great for the dam safety program. Under outreach and awareness, and we're getting close to the end of this, and I know it's been a long presentation, and death by PowerPoint's awful, but first of all, I'm happy to see that icon link on the Eagle webpage, so thanks for that. Provide periodic Dam Safety 101 awareness seminars to the Eagle staff, all the Eagle staff, up and down and left and right, the PIOs, the attorneys, any specific units that help the dam safety program from time to time. Just a dam safety awareness seminar periodically to keep everybody marching the same direction. Develop a proactive written outreach and awareness program for the external stakeholders, and we've listed who they would be. An area that is relatively new for dam safety programs, and it may not be critical for Michigan, but we recommend that you consider safety at dams. Dams are an inherently dangerous place for people to be, but they're attractive to people, and people always congregate around dams. So we need to have an informed public, and our recommendation is that you set up a voluntary safety at dams initiative team, part of a Silver Jackets initiative, formed with multidiscipline members and the stakeholders, and then the team would focus on developing outreach and educational initiatives to help with awareness about safety at dams. One of the critical areas is in low head dams, or run-of-river dams, if you will. Those dams that become part of the landscape and people don't even recognize them as dams. So we made several recommendations with regard to safety at dams, and so there are a lot of things that can be done with regard to safety at dams. I'd like to talk about the categorization of recommendations. The categories don't necessarily relate to the importance that our team put to any of the findings and recommendations. We think they're all important, but they were categorized based on many factors, including the current staff size and the ability to address the recommendations, the relationship of one recommendation to another that might require sequencing, the potential for immediate impact, the ease with which some recommendations could be accomplished. So what we've done is we put these in, they're not only talked about in the body, but they're also included in Appendix N1 and N2 of the report. And Category 1 recommendations, we've actually put them into 3 categories. Category 1 are those things that require immediate action, would take 0 to 2 years to complete. These are things that are relatively easy to meet with the current staff, probably shouldn't require any rule changes or legislation changes, so that's not in your timeline. These are the most critical unless it requires a rule change. In other words, get on these right away. Category 2 recommendations are those that are also immediate but require more time, like 1 to 3 years to complete. They may require legislation or rule changes. And then finally, Category 3. These are still important, but they require long-term action, 3 or 4 years. They may be dependent upon other recommendations being accomplished first, and so they take more time. We then did another thing in the appendix. The recommendations are ranked within each category. So all of the recommendations are in the report. They're in the appendices. You can take a look at those whenever you get the report, but we consider all the recommendations to be important for dam safety. Before I open it up to questions, I just want to say thanks to the Dam Safety Program staff, especially Luke and Dan and Mario, for their time and effort in pulling all the information together. That takes a long time. It's a great part of the whole process of a peer review, because it causes you to look inward to find out, well, where are all these things? So we want to thank them and everybody else at Eagle for their assistance and for being open with us. We found everybody to be open and honest in their questionnaires and in their interviews. We did a lot of interviews. And so big thanks to you all back there in Michigan. I also want to give Bob and Ken time to say something before we go to questions. So with that, I'll turn it back to Bob.
Okay, thanks, Bill. A few things as I was listening, and I thought, well, I wonder if the folks that are listening know what we're talking about. One of those is hazard classification. When Bill referenced high and significant and low, those are not related to the potential that the dam would fail. It's more a measure of what happens if the dam fails. And if there's a high hazard, if there's a high potential for loss of life, it goes in the high hazard potential category. Significant hazard is one that there's not as much probability for loss of life, but maybe more infrastructure damage. And the low hazard potential, there's minimal potential for loss of life. It's ones where you have farm fields downstream or timber areas or things like that. Not that somebody couldn't be there, but the potential for loss of life is low. So there's different criteria in the design and construction of the dam that deals with what hazard classification it's in. Another item was first filling. That term relates to after a dam is designed and constructed, I'll use that term first. and it's the first time water is going to be impounded behind it. The majority of dam failures that have occur on first filling, or the other component is if you've had one that's been reconstructed and you've been drawing the lake down so it's lower to do the construction, and then you're loading the new construction area again with raised water surface elevation. That's the refilling of a lake for that purpose, and it puts additional load on. So those are areas that we kind of look at that have to be addressed pretty significantly. Those are the things that kind of I picked up on. Ken, did you have anything else?
There's a couple of thoughts that jumped to my mind as we did this, and thought of the large audience listening to the program, that many of the audience may not know some of the real basic facts related to dam safety, both in Michigan and in the nation as a whole. I think the general public view of dams is most people believe somehow the federal government owns the vast majority of dams in the nation, and somehow that the federal government has this large regulatory role with regard to all dams. And both of those are really false thoughts. The vast majority of dams are not in federal ownership. I believe I've seen the number as about 4% of all dams in the nation that are regulated by somebody are actually owned by the federal government, where they have an ownership interest. The vast majority of the dams aren't regulated by the federal government. Most of the 95,000 or so dams in the nation are actually regulated by state programs, just like the program here in Michigan. And kind of again, back to ownership of structures. Most people still think that the rest of dams are owned by some sort of government organization. The reality is, in the vicinity of about 65 to 70% of all dams in the nation, and I believe the numbers are true here in Michigan also, are in some sort of a private ownership. And I think that becomes part of the real reality people need to think about, that private owners are owning most of these dams. And just because they're privately owned, they doesn't mean that they aren't a safety risk. Matter of fact, the private owned dams of high hazard dams is just as high a percentage. And so a real focus of the programs of not only Michigan, but everywhere in the country really is looking at that large percentage of privately owned structures, people that probably aren't funded that well for the routine yearly things and the life cycle costs of owning a dam. And it really becomes the one big challenge that all of us have to work with a lot, are these private owners, trying to get them to rehab things when they are needed as their dams age, and try to work with them when the one thing we hear from them so often is, I don't have the money to take care of things. So that's kind of the bigger picture of this. This isn't just about government-owned dams. The vast majority of them are in private ownership. With that, I'm open to some questions along with the team.
Bill, are you all set then? Any final comments from the team before we move on to the next phase here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, we are part of a process. We're in the middle of a process. So I'm going to move on from the PowerPoint first by saying I'm going to cover some process stuff here for our next agenda item. So if you'll bear with me for just 2 or 3 minutes. First off, I'd have to say, Bill, you and the team had me at life cycle analysis. Very, very happy to hear that, as well as many other things. I don't know about the rest of the task force members or listeners, but I have to say my head is spinning a little bit right now. I appreciate that many of you are going to need a chance to read and digest this. Not everybody necessarily has an initial reaction or question, although we've covered so much ground. I'm sure we've got a lot out there. So today, what we're looking for in the next agenda item is to allow an opportunity for task force members to ask clarifying questions. I'd like to touch on just a couple of more items, though, before we get to those questions. I do plan to go around the room just because there are so many people on the call. It's going to be tough to see the hand raises. When I do go around the room with the task force members, feel free to say I'm not ready yet, and I will make a note and come back to everyone and so forth. So that's the way I plan on handling it for today. And the list is just an alpha list. I'm just going to start at the top since folks will have another chance. Secondly, what our agenda item says is it talks about future agenda and focus areas. In discussion with the vice chair, chair, and so forth, as well as Eagle staff, we've talked a little bit about, I think people get a sense that this report helps us at a high level in two areas. One, it identifies some categories, some areas that should help us to shape our agendas in the future. And I want to acknowledge that we did get input from everybody last time on expectations. A lot of those expectations fit within these issue areas. The second thing that this report does is it prioritizes those agenda areas. And if you've got questions or comments on that, any of that stuff really after the fact, you're welcome to reach out to me, task force members, with, hey, I'm concerned about this area, or I'm not so sure now that I've read the report 2 weeks later that this item that wasn't in the higher priority area, I think it should be a higher priority. So I will be able to have some of that input and discussion offline if you're not able to conjure up exactly how you want to say that today. Outside of that, so anyway, there will be an opportunity, I think, to also put together task teams if people really want to take a deeper dive into a particular area. Again, it seems like a lot of the things that were brought up do fit in with most of the areas of the report. I do want to acknowledge, and I think I had gotten a heads up from Eagle ahead of time, that many of you had comments, questions previously, or expectations that we might spend a little time or maybe a lot of time discussing the topic of natural resources, dam removal. I'll just say that theme. And that's not heavily covered in this report, but we recognize that that's going to be something to make space for. So I do want to, at this time, again, before we're doing the questions, one more quick self-introduction. I'm going to ask Julie Meddy-Bennett from Public Sector Consulting to just add her 2 cents on their role with that agenda, our future focus areas, what those topics are going to look like. We're not going to announce that today, but I expect subsequent to this meeting, we'll be able to identify something before next meeting that says this is the shape of the future meetings that we've got scheduled. And Julie's also going to talk just a little bit about their role in putting together our output, our deliverable, our report. So just so she flashes forward a little bit to those process pieces. And then once she's done, we'll get right into the Q&A stuff. So hey, Julie, if you'd like to go ahead.
Actually, it's Lisa. Julie, do you mind if I jump in for 2 seconds?
Of course, Director.
I'm sorry. I just want to let people know I forgot in my upfront comments to mention that the big boss has required me to join her at 11:20. I promise this is the only reason that I would miss one of these task force meetings outside of like a child being sick. But I do have to hop off in just a minute. I apologize. You've got fantastic Eagle staff here, and my chief deputy, Aaron Keatley's on. So if you need anything from us, we're here and stand at the ready. So my apologies. Julie, it's all yours.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we're so happy to have been selected to support this task force. I'm joined by Elizabeth Riggs, who has, many of you probably know her. She's done a lot of work on dams in her former life at the Huron River Watershed Council. And Aaron Lammers as well, who is going to be helpful to the secretary in terms of taking notes. So that'll be our team that you'll be seeing. Mark Coscarelli, who's also has quite a bit of dam expertise from his days working with the department, will also be working with us. But these 3 ladies are who you'll be seeing moving forward. And our role is to facilitate these discussions along with Evan. We do this a lot. We staff a lot of task forces and blue ribbon committees for the governor and for agencies. This report that ASDSO has provided is making our job so much easier. This is amazing work. And I think it'll really accelerate the process, which is good because this is a very tight time frame that you all are under. So what we're planning to do after this meeting is to field a survey to you all that will allow you to, based on the buckets, the recommendation categories that have been laid out by ASDSO, and other topics that you feel like are missing the natural resource or that are not as emphasized as much as you might like, for example, natural resources, you'll be able to identify that in this survey. And we will take, can you guys hear me?
Yes, you're good, Julie.
Okay,
Yes.
you're all frozen on my screen and maybe I'm frozen on yours, but as long as you can hear me, that's great. We'll take those survey results so that we can hit the ground running at our next meeting, dividing and conquering. So breaking into groups that you volunteer for to be able to really take a deep dive into those recommendations, to filter through them so that after a couple of meetings of subgroups, we can all come back together and vet those recommendations together to come up with a final report that we will do the majority of the writing on based on your input. So that's the plan for now, and we're here to support you. So anything I didn't cover, Evan, that you'd like me to cover?
No, I think I just wanted to make sure people saw you and understood what your role was and were able to put a face and a name together. So thank you very much, Julie.
Yes.
And one more time, I meant to say this up front, just personally, thank you again to the the Association of State Dam Safety Officials, specifically, of course, Bill, Bob, Ken, and Dennis, who could not be with us here today. So with that last thank you, I'm going to start going around the room. And again, I apologize. I see some folks did do the raise hand thing, but I know I'm not going to be able to multitask well enough. So I'm just going to start off with MDOT. I believe, Richard, you're our substitute today. Did you have a clarifying question or anything that you wanted to ask right now? Or is that Brad that's here from MDOT?
Yeah, this is Brad. So
okay,
yeah, this
sorry.
is very new to me. I'm actually in the field working right now and listening in. Great presentation, but I really haven't had time to dive into the report yet. So at this time, I don't have any comments.
Yep, so sounds good. Again, any questions or comments, feel free to shoot those in to me or the Eagle folks. PSC definitely is going to be key as well, and we'll make sure that we provide Julie's information, contact information, or her team members' information to the task force pretty quick here after our meeting. Next on the list, Mindy, did you have any questions about the report or any clarifying items?
I guess not as many questions as I think it would be really good. I did like the org chart. I thought it was really good. I think they definitely, I know we have only 2 dam safety technical members in Eagle right now. And I think it's very important to, like they suggested, build a team. So you have senior, junior staff, technicians, and admin to help everybody out so we can cover more stuff. But I guess the other thing is, I know from the last meeting we had and this one too, is when a dam, produces energy, it's under FERC, and then the Eagle doesn't really get copies or anything of those reports until it loses its license and FERC basically turns it back over. I think just a little more clarification. If it's a dam in Michigan, I just don't see how or why Eagle shouldn't be kept up and be getting copies of all those reports, at least the condition reports. So they're under the same loop and they understand what's going on. And if it's starting to fail, they should be able to step in as well with FERC. So
let me just flip that into a question then, because I kind of thought the same thing. Bill, why don't you let us know which team member you mentioned that some states do have a program with FERC. And I think maybe what Mindy might be getting at is when you know you're likely to receive one, or when FERC knows they're likely to be handing one over, is there a way to flag something that says, we know this one has some risks associated with it? Is that what would be included in the program you described that some states use? Or do you want to just kind of walk us through maybe the high level view or the next level view of what that type of coordination looks like, Bill?
I'll say one thing first, but then I'm going to let Bob or Ken, as state regulators, kind of address that question. I will say this, California and Pennsylvania are two opposite examples. They're pretty big programs. By that, I mean well-staffed and have a lot of dams, have a lot of big dams. And they have a lot of FERC dams in Pennsylvania. There are FERC dams in California. But can you hear me?
Following about scheduling from Dr. Kurtzik's office for your back.
Sorry, hey, we've got someone who needs to mute on the line. If everybody except for Bill, make sure they're muted, please.
What I will say is California does do dual regulation. They regulate dams, FERC hydropower dams, as well as FERC. So they have that benefit then of having all that information in a timely way and continually. Pennsylvania is just the opposite. They've decided in their regulations, we're not going to cover FERC dams. And that's probably the case in most jurisdictions. And so it is a common problem. This issue of transfer of information is a common problem across the US. Ken or Bob?
This is Bob. In Illinois, also dual regulates those structures. As we were being tasked to develop a dam safety program in Illinois, we had a blue ribbon committee of folks that included federal regulators and federal dam builders in addition to others. And that was part of what they included in their recommendations. So that's what Illinois has. And we have found that in doing that, it keeps us apprised of all the dams. Multiple times we go to the same dam at the same time that the FERC inspection is occurring, so it doesn't put an additional imposition on the dam owner, because sometimes they have to cordon off certain areas to be able to allow access into certain areas. So we try to work that in coordination with them. I think Ken's on the other side of that. He's more like Pennsylvania and Michigan, one that does not have that duplicative jurisdiction.
And yeah, Bob, that's correct. Indiana was not set up with dual jurisdiction. And I can see pros and cons on both sides of this. You know, typically we will go out with, our staff does go out often, they get invited by the folks from FERC to come with them to do an inspection or have contact of these dams. But the federal people have something they call primacy, where they are very much in charge by federal law. And they remind our staff of that and the owners of that often. Under the few circumstances when I can think back specifically with dams, when there is a different piece of it where there has been dual regulation, where our program inspected dams and there was federal oversight. It was particularly with coal mine dams. There was a lot of pushback by the owners saying, we're confused. We have two different agencies, a federal agency and a state agency, telling us what we're supposed to do. How are we supposed to do what both of you want? And sometimes you might not agree with each other. And because of that, our legislation got changed, particularly removing us from that piece of dual oversight control. If the federal agency has control, they have control. And so I can kind of see both sides of it. Now, I recognize that as things have gone wrong with dams, the state program, as they're about to get jurisdiction back on a problem dam, it does not have the data and the information behind them. I think Bill made the comment that's actually fairly common. As ASDSO has asked its members in the 50 states that question over the last month or two, quite a few state program managers like myself have said there's difficulty getting that information out of FERC. There's a process, it's slow, it's cumbersome, we can't get it as quickly as we need it when problems are developing. And as we mentioned in the report, we suggested Michigan work with ASDSO as ASDSO brings this topic up to the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, this problem that is a nationwide problem about turnover. And just so you're aware, I'm still active on the board of directors of ASDSO. And at our last board meeting a couple of weeks ago, as an organization, we decided to move forward with that topic with the FERC in Washington, D.C., with their program managers to start discussing that issue and see if in a partnership way we can get that turnover information fixed and to occur more quickly among each of the FERC districts around the nation. I think you guys are actually regulated by the same people that our power dams in our state are, out of the Chicago office of FERC. And so, you know, it's kind of a common problem that we've been hearing about.
Yep. So sounds good. Yeah. And I haven't heard anybody bring up a great desire for joint regulation, but just so everyone knows, certainly based on the feedback last time, some of the discussion of your chair, vice chair, secretary has been, how do we get FERC in here? And I know Eagle staff is working on that. Maybe Aaron, as we get through this, you can give us an update on whether there's been much outreach there. But yeah, it's that information transfer. John Broshek, I've got you next on the list. Do you have any questions for the team?
Well, first of all, Bill, Bob, and Ken, I want to thank you for the depth and the breadth of the input from ASDSO. As the Vice President at Consumers Energy in charge of generation operations and what's probably the largest FERC-regulated portfolio of river dams and pump storage in the state, I have great appreciation for what you're speaking to, because it's the exact same requirements that FERC has mandated down to us, and what is the input into our Owner's Dam Safety Program that we're implementing here. That being said, I do have two specific questions. One is, can you give the task force members a perspective on the significance of dam safety in the state of Michigan as it compares to the national scene? Because certainly there's a bandwidth question on where does this compete with other priorities that the state will have, the governor's priorities, the legislative priorities. With our 2,600 dams, and I'm rounding these numbers, 2,600 dams, 1,000 regulated at the state level. How significant is dam safety in Michigan? We're very proud of our natural resource of water here in the state, but you know, in the scale of how significant dam safety should be taking in the state of Michigan, given the gaps that you've identified, can you give us a little perspective on your national view when you mention states like California, Pennsylvania, et cetera?
Bob, do you want to start, or Ken? I've got thoughts and I'll be happy to share them, but let you guys talk first.
Okay, and I know you don't have, or maybe you don't have the report yet, but that's the comparison with states that are at least close to you are included in Appendix L. There's a national spreadsheet that is essentially put together and broken down into components that shows how you compare to the other states in the region. That is also available, I think that's available on national relationships. So that's really the source that we went to and included in the report so that you'll have that information.
Just in the interest of time, does that answer your question, John?
Yes, thank you. The other is on funding. So, you know, underlying all of this is a funding question. And so you've given us kind of a purview of what the state agency funding should look like based on your recommendations. You commented on the loan program, but can you also comment on you know, broader than that? I mean, it's one thing to have a loan program, but many of these private owners, there's really no source or no easily identifiable source to me of how do they fund their maintenance, their operation, their safety initiatives. Are there any other recommendations or input that the task force can consider in terms of how we advance our recommendations to the governor?
I think this is Bill. I think it gets back to And I think I understand what you're asking about. It's basically and for using a crude term, maybe the mom and pop dams or the organization that has a recreation lake or something like that. Doesn't really have a revenue stream. It's always problematic. It's problematic not just in Michigan, but everywhere. It gets down to the fact that if you own a dam, you have a responsibility to operate and maintain it in a safe way. And it's maybe sad and kind of coarse to say, but if you can't afford to operate and maintain it, then you probably shouldn't own it, and maybe you don't need it. Now, that said, there are other funding or avenues. Management Association for those entities that want to have a lake for recreation or what have you. There's a National Lake Management Society, NALMS, and there are usually state chapters of that. They've got maybe some revenue streams. There are other small revenue streams, but there's not very many, particularly for private owners. So that's a difficult thing to go to. I want to circle back for really quickly on John's question about where does Michigan stand. The only other thing I'll add beyond that, the big spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet has a lot of information. It's going to kind of boggle your mind. There's a lot of categories there that you can compare Michigan to. I will say this is just me talking, not ASDSO. I've been involved in about 30 peer reviews. I would say that Michigan's somewhere in the middle. You're in the Midwest. You're in the middle with regard to, and this, I'm speaking really in very broad terms here. You know, I'd put California at the forefront simply because they've got a huge program, well-staffed, but they got a lot of huge dams. I would put Pennsylvania and Ohio and some others, New York, New Jersey, as those that have a very robust dam safety program. Those programs that I characterize as robust have a pretty aggressive enforcement program. And they have the means to require owners to do things. And if they don't, then the state can act, and the state has the funds to do it. That's just a circle back. So,
okay, thank you. For the sake of time,
Ken.
I'll pass.
I'll circle back on one more thing. In your question, you were talking about funding sources. And I really circle all the way back to an earlier comment about the report didn't talk a whole lot about removal of structures. And that's really where I'd go with these things that are privately owned. Goodness, especially if they're owned by an individual. The owner really needs to take a hard look at understanding the life cycle costs of owning a dam. And if they can't really afford that, really the first thing as part of any feasibility study for repair or anything that needs to be looked at is the removal option. You know, removal or decommissioning of a dam is, if it's not serving a current purpose, that one-time cost of removal can often be a whole lot more affordable to somebody than the life cycle costs of keeping that structure out there. And I think owners need to really kind of take that one to heart. Even the state itself, and I'm speaking really about my own state, has always taken that over the last decade to 20 years to heart as the very first decision we've looked at. You know, owning dams and rehabbing dams is amazingly expensive. And the first thing we always look at is this structure still needed? And in many cases, they're not. And removal becomes the option that makes a whole lot more financial sense. Those are hard discussions to have with an owner, but they're the kind of things that really does need to occur. along the way. Many of these structures are so old. You know, the people bought a piece of property with something already on it, and they really aren't aware of the financial liabilities and the obligations they got themselves into. I really wish the one thing that was pushed nationally was more educational efforts for people as they are out buying things, so that they don't buy themselves into the problem of owning some of these really problematic structures.
Thanks. John, I think the answer to your question on grants and funding was go to Appendix L and also look in there for comparatives to other states. Does that help you out?
Yes, thank you.
Just for housekeeping too, it's about 20 to 12. I can see that we're going to go over our time. So if any task force members need to give somebody else a heads up, or if you're going to need to drop off, that's okay. But I would ask, I guess, what might be helpful, some of these questions do require a little bit more of an answer, but if the answer is in the report, maybe just give us a little guidance as to where to look for that answer, like you did with Appendix L. I think that's really helpful. We're all going to be diving into that report, and I'm sure we'll have additional questions after today about how did you get to this, or how did you figure that. I have been told from Eagle that the bulk of the report, the meat of the report, the write-up is about 60 pages. Bill did a good job of summarizing it, but there's over 100 pages of appendices and additional information, supporting information, what they dug through. So people will be able to see that. And again, I feel like for responding to our questions, some of them do require a little bit of a longer version, but I don't think we have, 6 to 10 minutes. We got 15 more people to go through. So we're all in control of how long we sit here, I guess would be another way to say that. Brian Burrows. Sorry, Bill, go ahead.
I'll say, I think the team, at least some of the team, would be available for follow-up questions as you move forward, in writing and so forth. So
great. Yeah, just help us find the answer. If it's kind of a longer answer, a complicated answer, would be helpful. Just knowing that you've covered a question is going to help us a lot. Certainly getting a little bit of an answer is helpful here too. I've got Brian Burrows next on the list. Brian?
All right.
Any questions?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the report. I think you disagree on our assignment, so thank you. And Ken, thank you very much for your last comment about removals as well. One question I have right now is, and again, if it's in the report, you can just say that, that's fine. But on the enforcement and compliance, the aggressiveness, I have certain interest in trying to get objective rather than subjective with how we escalate enforcement. And I was just wondering, given the comments in the presentation, does the ASDSO have any models for what you think good, rigorous, objective compliance models are?
This is Bob, and I'm not remembering anything as a model for that kind of activity. Bill, do you or Ken have any recollection?
I think enforcement is covered to a certain extent in the model program, the Model Dam Safety Program that ASDSO has. So there should be some information there. There's information, a little more in the report, I'll say, than we've talked about here. And I do believe that I know Dennis Dickey is a strong component, or proponent, I should say, of rigorous enforcement. And I would be sure Denny would be happy to share Pennsylvania's enforcement policy with anybody. So that's something we could look at moving forward.
And it's not uncommon for states to struggle with that enforcement component. A couple of real quick thoughts I'd throw out is the phrase, progressive enforcement. You work with people up front. Most people, I think, will do the right thing if they can. Some people won't. You try to work with the agreeable people first, so you don't have to get into that whole enforcement component, and you'll probably get a lot more done. Some people will resist you, and you can spend years in court. So the notion of progressive enforcement, try to work with people up front. When that's not working, then you take stronger steps along the way. And then the other thing to think about is that risk prioritization that Bill had talked about along the way. One of the first things the manager ought to do is take the statewide list of regulated structures and do a risk assessment and focus on the high risk structures first. Pick 20 of them and work on the first 20 of the higher risk structures to really try to push them along to get compliance and things and get some work done under your belt. Then you kind of step back down the risk spectrum.
Great.
Thank you. And Evan, I'll stop with any questions for SDO folks, but you blended kind of the input that you wanted. So I will just say that for our future structure, you'd mentioned the concept of task teams, and I think in order for us to cover that and get to the that we need, definitely that we may need to break out into some topic teams. So that's it for now. Thank you.
Absolutely. I've got Director Clark next, but I think I'm going to just hopscotch over Eagle and presume that they've had opportunities to ask quite a few questions on this. I believe they did review this document to make sure it was ready for prime time, ready for release, ready for us. So next on my list is DNR, and I believe, James, you're substituting today. Is that right? You have a question?
Yeah, Jim Dexter. Thanks, Evan. One quick question. One of the recommendations indicated that there should be an independent review of engineering plans, I believe is what it was, on complex dams. I'd never heard that term before. Can you describe to me what a complex dam is?
Well, complex I'll try first, and then Bob and Ken could enter into it. Complex may not be the proper adjective, and since you've asked the question, I think I'd probably go back and look at that wording. But having said that, James, I think what we're talking about are large, high hazard dams that would pose a significant risk and have significant consequences if they fail. Not that they're badly designed or poorly designed, but that if they would fail, severe consequences. So it's more from that standpoint. And this wouldn't be the 10 or 15 or even 20-foot high dam. This would be dams that are more significant structures than that. But that which really, I think, command, and it's really very common practice now in the dam industry, and even endorsed by the consulting industry in dam design, that there should be independent review boards for significant projects that the owner has to pay for. But he keeps that design engineer, let's say, keeps the design engineer honest, and it also gets other eyes to come out the other side with a better product. That's
Okay,
all.
thank you. Thank you.
And by complex, think of situations, very tall dams with very difficult, problematic foundation settings, and perhaps many different moving parts and pieces compared to your typical smaller earthen dam, maybe with an open spillway or a riser pipe and an inlet. Things that get more complex that are high consequence, that during the design process, having that independent review of something before it gets permitted, a rehab or a new dam being built, just to make sure that the designers really covered things, is an important piece.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Good question, Brian. And I think I'll just cap that off too with whether we use the word complex or high hazard. What I'm hearing is the report suggests something that we're going to need to spend a little time in our own minds defining. if that is a recommendation this task force wants to have, we're going to have to put a little bit of shape to what are we talking about. And I'm sure every dam owner out there is going to want to know, well, where are you guys drawing the line if we all choose to go in that direction? Thank you, Brian. Next on the list, I have Brett.
Good afternoon. Thank you. And in the interest of everybody's time, I have no questions at the moment, other than if we do have questions that we'd like to submit in writing, how would that best be done and directed? And I also would endorse the establishment of task teams to kind of break this up into manageable chunks as well. And I'll take my answer off there. Thank you.
Thanks, Brett. I think I'll take a stab at that one. So we will make sure that Eagle in their next communication to the task force shares who should be receiving questions and what those email addresses are. I'm not so sure that we even have a little spreadsheet to tell task force members how to communicate with each other. So I will ask that, number one, we get a list of our contact information that we can share amongst each other. And I'm sure if you are asking any questions, I'm sure that your appointed officers, public sector consultants, and Eagle, I think at least 3 folks will be receiving those just to make sure they're together. But I will defer to direction from Eagle as to how they want to traffic cop those. I think at the end of the day, I personally would like to make sure that all of our questions, and as well as folks who are on the chat, can type into the chat box their questions. I don't think we're going to have time to answer them today if you're a member of the public, but I would love to see that we, at least summarize all the questions or themes and identify, what answers we can provide that haven't been already covered, in this recorded setting.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, no, good point. Marty, I've got you next up on the list. Do you have a question or comment for us?
Thanks, Evan. Just one quick question. I did want to reiterate what Brian says. Can your comment about removal being considered, I think that's very timely. There are a lot of NGOs right now working with private landowners and looking at the feasibility of removal and how that would rank. So thank you for that comment. One piece, and it may be embedded in the report, it was the engineering service contract. And I think that seems like a really resonating issue, especially when large issues take place like we had this year, and having someone on retainer to assist a staff which is already probably overburdened with their workload. In the report, is there recommendations for funding and experiences and qualifications that would be needed for that contractor?
Let me see. I don't think we had anything specific in the report that notes that information, but I think if you have firms that you've worked with that are familiar with dams, because there's a lot of firms, but not all of them are familiar with dams. And that's part of what needs to be included in any independent review panel that sits and works for you.
Yeah, I would say the starting point for that information, Marty, might come from states that do take advantage of consultant contracts. It's, as speaking as a former consultant, and I guess I'm still a consultant because I haven't figured out how to quit working, but I would say that consultants, there are engineering consulting contracts are pretty common. Not every state has them, but many states do. I'm from Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has an engineering services contract. And in fact, I believe they issue contracts to more than one consultant. And they're an ongoing contract. State of Pennsylvania, I'm sure, would be happy. And Dennis Dickey could get that information to you, I think. Happy to share with how they advertise and award those contracts. And then they've got the rates of the individuals, and then you do task orders following the award of the contract. You say, all right, I want to go to this firm and I want a task order to review this dam design. That type of thing.
Thank you.
Marty, I think I'm going to take your question and ask us to sort of put that on the list of things that to share with the task force later. I imagine Luke or others in the dam safety program can provide some information on what they see for usual suspects. If that's an area of concern we should spend time on, because I think your question was really about how in the heck would we come up with what would be the bar for pre-qualification for this. As many people may know, MDOT will pre-qualify people. That doesn't necessarily mean they're getting work, but they're pre-qualified in service areas. And if you're a consultant, you like that MDOT pre-qualification because that lets folks know you have met a bar of some sort. And that certifications are always important to owners, I think, at least if they're not experts in the area. So great question. Did you have another one, Marty, or was that?
Thanks, Evan. I just wanted to thank Bill and the rest of the team. Excellent presentation. It was helpful. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, great. Good questions, folks. I really appreciate this. Dana, you are up next. Comment, question?
Yeah, hopefully a quick question, maybe for Ken. I'm wondering if you could describe the, I don't know, population of entities who own dams in Michigan. What types of organizations are we talking about? Do the uses of the dams, are they associated with the types of owners? Are there any insights that we might use in making recommendations along those lines?
The specific makeup, I've seen general pie chart type descriptions of ownership groups. The specifics, you probably are better off really asking Luke on staff about the teams. But I think in general, it's going to be a lot like in our state. There will be lake owners associations around some of them that have ownerships. They may be homeowners associations. We have a thing in our state called conservancy districts that are like little local units of government that are created specifically for a particular water resource concern in the area, like owning a dam and maintaining a dam. There will be a lot of private individuals that just own the structure, or perhaps, depending on how they were set up, there might be 2 or 3 private individuals that own a specific dam that holds water back in a subdivision. But instead of the association owning it, it was left in ownership of the lots adjoining the embankment. So the 2 individuals, one may own the left half and one may own the right half of the dam. It's really a large mix of things. In addition to that, you will find in stream dams, I would not be at all surprised, where you can't find any ownership at all. Remember, many of these dams are 100 to 150 years old, and the ownership may just be lost in time, where I kind of have always referred to those as orphaned structures. But then you will also own or have some that are still owned by a group, an entity. Maybe it's the local a public water supply firm or a utility for a town that owns parts of these things, as well as a few that may be owned by power companies. So it's a real broad mix of ownership.
Thanks. I think I'll put a pin in the, just double check with Eagle on any slicing and dicing for themes of ownership. But I do want to echo, there's an awful lot of dams where ownership is unclear. And unlike most property where people usually argue about what they own, I think most of us are familiar with that experience, that the argument in dams is typically trying to demonstrate you do not own the dam. So with that, Dana, did you have another question, or was that kind of the one thing that you wanted to throw out there?
That was helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Doug Jester, got you next on the list.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to read your report, and I'll ask follow-up questions as necessary through the email process. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Doug. I appreciate that. Jim Kochever.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it, and thanks for the great work on well, both the work and evaluation and the presentation. Not necessarily to prolong conversation or answer for today or now, but just a couple of thoughts for the task force going forward. We had conversation here on funding for mostly underfunded or smaller type dam owners, but there, you know, there's a very extensive report here on kind of a redevelopment of a state dam safety department and or program. There's a very large funding component for that, or to that, for the state. So, you know, as with all pieces of work like this, you know, maybe a state contemplation of how to fund any changes, but may also be part of this task force's work going forward, just to discuss some funding sources for a beefed up dam safety program, if you will. We talked a little bit about at the first meeting about streamlining the dam removal process. That's been touched on many times here. I think would be beneficial to go through that. Again, I think beneficial for removal of some of those small dams and maybe the only option, but we talked about it being a very cumbersome process. So again, maybe future task force work. And I think that's it. You know, the only other note that I had was in the report, there was mention of a revolving loan fund for privately held dams. Maybe a question or a piece of investigation: is there such a mechanism for, or I'm sorry, it was the revolving loan fund was listed for publicly held dams. Is there such a mechanism for privately held dams? And could that be a mechanism to funnel some funding to some smaller owners? Again, with that, most of that contemplation for committee going forward, but I'll cede the rest of my time. Thanks all.
So sounds good. I think we did hear a little snippet too on some of the things that are done with, it sounds like, national NGOs. Bill, do you want to just summarize? Is there something in the report that says private dams are sometimes funded in this way, that way, or the other way? Is there something that people can look at so at least we know what's already in there?
I don't think we talk very much about funding, right, particularly for privately owned dams. Even these revolving loan programs that are used in some states are generally restricted to publicly owned dams. In other words, they're going to be water supply, municipal dams. They wouldn't even include a public utility water supply dam that has a revenue stream, but more like a municipal water supply dam, something like that. So there's not very much out there for funding privately owned dams.
Right. So it sounds like another reason that there's a recommendation for a state pot of money for situations that arise where you need to step in, basically.
The one thing I'd point out, never forget, privately owned dams can still be a public safety risk. And so I know that a lot of people automatically say, oh, you know, tax funds, public funds shouldn't go into these private dams. Speaking just for myself as Ken, I've kind of always not agreed with that. You know, I recognize they're a public safety risk. I think some funding can go into it, but perhaps, I know one thing we did years ago, when we did manage to get some money after a disaster to put towards, in that case, a grant program, we made the private owners partner with somebody locally. Now, the local may have been the town, it may have been the county commissioners. There was a local sponsor that was involved in that process. It was a grant process with us. It could just as easily have been a loan in order to help some of those critical privately owned structures get fixed.
Great. So sounds good. Thank you. So at least we know that it's not something that's covered in depth in the report, and we might want to spend time as a task force just getting taking another look at the 1,000 or so privately owned dams that we have out there, and other gaps that we might want to at least spend time on clarifying what is and isn't available. Paul Maloka, do you have a question for the group?
Yeah, Evan, I wanted to just make a comment here, and I'm looking forward to reading this ASDSO report. I see a lot of good recommendations in there. I just want to circle us back to this question of Edenville, which is why we're all sitting here to begin with. And we're waiting for the final report on what happened there. But from what I understand, you know, that disaster is a result of a long chain of events, most of which happened under FERC regulation or didn't happen under FERC regulation. And as we all know, or anybody who is familiar with this knows, FERC is far more rigorous regulation than the state has. And I think the state probably needs to come up to a lot of that level. But, you know, before we talk about just simply trying to duplicate that level of a program, obviously that it slipped through the cracks with FERC, okay, that situation there. So it kind of circles me back to this bigger picture, which I've heard quite a bit, you know, talking about risk awareness and risk acceptance, which I did see also in the ASDSO report mentioned. So anyway, I just wanted to put that on the table there as a consideration as we start talking about, making changes in the Michigan program.
Yeah, duly noted. That makes a lot of sense, Paul. Thank you. Tanya, did you have a question for the team here?
Nothing to add right now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I'm next up on the alphabet. I'm going to use one that was in the chat. Does the report touch at all on the recommendations of 2006 as far as implementation, not necessarily to point a finger, but is there any factual representation of, well, this was recommended in 06 and it did or didn't get put in place, or is that something we need to just look at the 06 report for?
Bob, you want to address that, or?
Yeah, okay, I got trying to get my unmute button on. So,
no problem.
We touched on parts of that, but we didn't get into specific and go point by point.
Okay, that's fine. Just a question, partly for the listeners, because I saw in the chat that folks have asked about both of those reports, and they are both posted now on the Dam Safety Task Force section of Eagle's website. So pretty easy to get to if folks want to look at it. Bob, sorry, you were going to add a little something there, but I don't know if it was germane or your thought.
That's okay. I mean, we touched on some of the basics, but we included that as one of the appendices, so it's there for everybody also.
Yeah, great, appreciated. Bill Rustum, what do you have?
Just to follow up on the question that Jim asked earlier, I noted that you talked about the revolving loan fund for publicly owned dams. Do we have a list, or one thing that would be helpful for our consideration? Who is the owner of the high hazard dams in Michigan? Where are they, and who owns them? That would be helpful for our consideration, I think. So that's really a question for DEQ.
Well,
yeah,
I think I would say
see those online.
Program should have that.
Sorry, Bill. Sorry, that is online for Eagle. We could probably do a screenshot of that map, but they have a map where you can kind of toggle on and off. I only want to look at high hazard dams. I only want to look at this and that. I did notice though that at least in my look, I didn't figure out what button to click to make sure it captured every single type of dam, because it doesn't show the FERC dams, for example. These are Eagle regulated dams, but I'm sure we could get a screenshot. But the nice part is then there's a dot you can click on and it gives you some very basic information about that particular facility. But duly noted, Bill, I think that's information that is available and can be shared, and particularly with what we've talked about here, trying to focus progressively on where's our areas of risk. We got to have that. That's a good question. If you were good there, I got Dan Scripps next.
Yeah, it's a quick question, and if it's easier to answer it offline, that's fine. But I'm wondering from a structural perspective, so the Public Service Commission has an energy security section that includes a strong focus on energy infrastructure. We have regular, obviously, communications with utilities, including those who own dams or who are the off-takers for third-party owned dams for the power from them. And then, obviously, a markets relationship with FERC. In terms of the federal energy regulators. And I'm wondering if you've seen in other states trying to bring together, the state EPAs like EGLE with state public service commissions who may have some of this expertise or expertise that exists in other parts of state government in terms of whether there are any best practices from California, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, some of the other states that you held out. And if it's in the report or if it's easier to answer offline, I'm happy to take the answer there.
I'm sorry, I was trying to capture in my mind what particular.
I guess the relationships between different parts of state government that may have connection to this. So in ours, it's we have oversight over obviously the investor-owned utilities that own dams. We also have an energy security section that has a focus on energy infrastructure. I'm guessing that MDOT and probably other entities, DNR, have relationships with dam owners and just trying to understand from a structural perspective whether there are best practices from other states.
Okay. For Illinois, I think Ken referenced the mining side of the thing. So I'll see if this maybe answers your question. When we started regulating the mine sites and had those same questions from those that were also regulated by Office of Surface Mining or some other component plus EPA plus the Corps of Engineers, we sat down with the mining community and brought in all of those other agencies to develop a listing and see where were the overlaps in requirements and who had the most strict requirement, and whoever had the most strict requirement, that's what was written in the report. So when the owners went to make an application, they knew that they had addressed all the components that were going to give them the most trouble. And so that was put out, and we worked together with the mining community to accomplish that. Now, I don't know if that gets specific to where you're thinking, but I think the same concept could be used with any of the state organizations to say, okay, we all have different parts of this puzzle. How best can we communicate to the dam owners what is needed when they are going to work on their dams or need to do something? Does that get close to where you're trying to go?
Yeah, I think so. I'll follow up offline if I've got more.
Okay.
Great, good question, Dan, too, and maybe one that illustrates it more to think about. I'm sorry to jump in again. I've written down another question of whether or not did the report touch on at all the relationship of, we have a lake level statute that's a little different than the dam statute. It's another part. But because Michigan is so wet, there are an awful lot of court set lake levels that create some difficulties for dam operators in what they, legally can and can't do. And of course, legally does mean if no one objects to the dam being lowered because they think it's in their best interest, sometimes people don't go back to court and change those. But is that addressed at all, that there's a relationship there in the report? I think this is maybe like Dan's question of maybe not directly, but we may have to come back to it.
I think we did touch on that, not to get specific about, this is what you ought to have, but yeah, we looked at both sides of those regulations. I don't remember anything specific like saying you needed to change this particular regulation. We were trying to keep them in place the way you had them, but just expand whatever criteria that we were covering. Bill or Ken, do you remember anything else specific about that?
I remember more of the conversations. We talked about the fact that several of us states have a very similar set of procedures like what you were just talking about. When I think of the northern part of our state, there are many glacial remnant lakes that are out there with small dams, small lake control structures that are in place to hold those court established levels. And as we talked, several other of the states in the area that have those glacial lakes talked about that, and the fact that there certainly is a kind of a dual regulation that occurs in that process. And I'd just use the phrase, it complicates things a little bit when local court gets involved because of those lake levels on a real dam. But specific recommendations in the report, not that I remember, it was just something we certainly shared and talked about.
Yeah. Well, I'll work with the Eagle team and PSC to identify how we might deal with that issue in an agenda. I just know it's come up as an impediment, an obstacle, and it's not necessarily it's sort of tangential to what does your dam safety program look like. It's a complication of people being able to communicate with each other and be able to do what makes sense in certain situations, et cetera. So, and
it's also a financial complication for Eagle themselves, because those court established levels wind up implying a financial obligation to the structures. And so that's part of the discussion we had about the state in general probably does own dams, and they need to lead by example and take care of their dams and set a good example for others. And there's certainly a financial component to that. Sounds good. Again, apologize, we're at 12:15 here, but I think we are just have a couple, three more task force members for comment. We'll be able to move on to public comment. So Stan Vitan, did you have anything question-wise for these folks?
Yeah, I'll make a quick question here. Bill, in his presentation, made a comment about permitting unpermitted dams. And in Michigan, currently, all dams that are over 5 acres in aerial extent and 6 feet in terms of high water and the outflow. What exactly, Bill, did you mean by permit unpermitted dams?
And I may defer to one of my colleagues here, but there are a number of dams we know that are on the inventory that are that do not require a permit, and whether that's size or capacity and or hazard class or some combination thereof. And we made the recommendation that those dams, that the legislation ought to have requirements, even though those dams don't require a permit, that they require those owners to maintain those dams. Ken and Bob, anything further on that?
Well, the one thing I'd point out is the age of so many of these structures. The structures very well might have been built long before any state laws went into place. And so there could easily be dams out there that never went through the permit process. They just are. Now they're regulated, they're inspected, but they've never really had that deep dive back into the engineering, design, and procedures and construction techniques that were used when they were built. Are they really up to current standards, and should they just be, it's part of that thing we were recommending, that reevaluation process about every 10 years. It's one of the major lessons learned from the Oroville Dam incident in California, that you often need to go back about once every 10 years and take a really good look at the structures and see if modern processes, modern thoughts say something else needs to be done with the structure.
Right. Yeah, I think that's well said, Ken. And we suspect that there are many dams in Michigan that are old enough that there probably isn't any engineering document on the in the files that would show how they were designed and constructed. As Ken, I believe, said, they're just there, and so you need to collect that information. That's what's meant by that.
Oh, okay, so the report isn't necessarily addressing the limits that the Michigan currently has on what should be permitted and what shouldn't be permitted.
No, that, I don't think we were going there. It was more like Ken and Bill have said, and Illinois is in the same position. You've got a lot of those dams that are out there, and if they're in the low hazard potential category, we aren't going out and searching to get them permitted, but the highs and significant, we are.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Thanks, Stan. Abby, do you have any questions?
Yes, actually, one of my areas focused in on is the public safety and resiliency. So really interested in the recommendation to have a general dam emergency response plan in case of a dam emergency should occur. And this is more of how would the state and locals work together and respond to a dam emergency. So I'm curious to see what other states have something along this lines that we could really take a look at and see what is all included in that. I'm also curious on with FERC, they have just come out based on Oroville and made some updates to what their recommendations are of what should be included in a emergency action plan. And our state recommendations is pretty on what should be included in those EAPs. So looking to see if there's any states or other best practice examples out there of what should be some of those factors we should be looking at and considering.
Well, one of the things that we worked on was to, and this would be one of the things I think we included in the manager position as we were talking about some of the different components there, was to get to work with the state emergency management agency and then work through their grouping of how they interact with the locals when an emergency occurs or an incident occurs in a particular area, so that everybody has an understanding of how it works, and if there needs to be modifications to see, okay, what's the best way to accomplish that. And for us, it was all writing the format down for our staff. This is the way it's going to work. When you're on the site, your representative, and in our case, it was for the local entity, to be able to have a resource that said, okay, we can help you. But the state also, emergency management group also told us, if you see something that's not being done correctly and puts people in perspective, they said, let us know immediately and we will take over control of that situation if we have to, and put you in charge of it until we get somebody else there. Those kinds of things, so that when I had my staff going out, they knew what they were supposed to do. They're supposed to help and do those things. They weren't supposed to be media spokespersons. They weren't supposed to do any of that. They're the technical resource, and let the other folks play there. And so all that's just kind of written, you just have to put it together so that everybody understands. Does that address the concerns you're asking?
And I would just add one thing, just in the way of, it sounds like a commercial for ASDSO, but one of the benefits of ASDSO is that, one, they have a lot of standard documents. So you may find some information just through ASDSO. But I think more to the point, the job of the Dam Safety Program Manager is to provide the vision and the initiatives on things like what you just asked about. His engagement in ASDSO is going to provide a wealth of contacts within the dam safety community that he can tap. He can go to various state regulators that have already developed this emergency response plan, and they'll share it. so that you're not starting with a blank sheet of paper. You're starting with something that you can quickly get to what you want to be your final emergency response plan that you work out with not only within Eagle, but also outside with the local stakeholders, the emergency response people and so forth. But you get there quicker if you have ability to tap those things.
Great. Hopefully that gives a little bit of shape, Abby, but it sounds like something that we may need to spend the time on again with. That will be something the task force probably does have to provide some direction for Eagle. How specific it is, I think we'll have to hash out amongst us. Did that answer your question generally, though?
Yes, I think generally.
Okay, sounds good. So our last task force member is Glenn Wazorek. Do you have any questions, Glenn?
Well, I'll probably reserve my questions till after I read the report, but just maybe a quick thought. Well, first of all, again, thank you, Bill, Bob, and Ken. The report was very impressive. From my experience as a former consultant and now a dam owner of both FERC and state dams, I'm not surprised by the recommendations. There are many industry standard efforts there, nothing really out of the ordinary. So for those of us who are hydro dam owners, I think we all probably see the comparable and parallel efforts there from our FERC requirements. So I see the report as a tremendous resource for us in the state moving forward. I think that implementation should be carefully considered by us. You know, there's a lot of recommendations there. So there's going to be a lot of, there's going to be some extraordinary changes likely ahead for the state. Impacts on, you know, every aspect. So how do we successfully execute all of these recommendations? So the implementation strategies, that's an interest to me. And I'm wondering if the state, if they desire that to be a focus of our group, coming up with implementation strategies to make the recommendations successful. Someone brought up a good question about what was in the 2006 report, and was any of that implemented? Did any of that become successful procedures and requirements for the state? And I guess lastly, I just want to say to Julie and Elizabeth, welcome aboard. I also shared with Director Clark the thought of like starting with the end goal in mind and how to wrangle this group into some particular focus areas to make sure we're delivering something that the state is looking for. So I'm anxious to hear more from you as we move forward. So that was it, Evan. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks so much for all the task force member questions. I know a few people had to drop off. Again, I apologize. We might have to revisit our timing, although I think our future meetings, we are going to have a little less of the go around the room and get individual comments for everybody. As we get into the details, again, we're going to have to figure out what's the best way to identify work groups, task teams, or whatever we want to call it. So in the interest of getting to the last agenda item on our meeting, the public comment side of things, I'd like to actually turn this over to PSC just to allow another one of their team members, Elizabeth Riggs, to be online. And I don't think I'm going to be able to do a good job of monitoring both the meeting chat as well as any hand raises. So again, for anyone who's on the call, this is your time now to make a comment or statement or provide a question. Again, we won't be answering questions today, but we will be trying to accumulate all of these with what the task force members have said. So in order to ask a question, if you're on the computer, either use the hand raise feature, or if you'd like to just type your question into the meeting chat, I have asked PSC to at least just read any questions that come through the chat, as well as calling on people with a hand raise. And then my last comment will be, if you're on the phone, again, the hand raise feature is *9. If you're driving, please pull over before you do that. But otherwise, I'd like to turn this over to Elizabeth and Julie and the PSC team to just start taking our public comment.
Hi, Evan. Thank you. Okay, so I think to start off, we will start with Sally Lusk. So we are in the public comment period of our meeting, and each person who cares to comment today has up to 3 minutes. So we'll start a timer, and if you're getting close to that 3-minute time, we'll give you a warning. So again, as Evan said, please raise your hand or put your questions in the comment box, and we will do our best to find those. And if we miss you, please speak up. So Sally Lusk, do you have a comment that you'd like to make?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and great report and great review. I'm glad I was able to tune in for it this morning. My request is that when you develop, the state develops this list of high hazard dams and their owners, if they could please add the concept that was described this morning in relation to complexity, because I would like to have the height and whether there's any parts and pieces, etc., the type of dam.
Message MO20. The customer you have called is unavailable or has traveled outside the coverage area.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Try your call again later.
Your microphone.
Message MO20.
Were you able to hear me okay?
Yeah, hold on just a moment, Sally. Everyone else, please mute your telephones.
Is unavailable or has traveled outside the coverage area. Please try your call again later. Message MO20.
Were you able to hear me okay, Elizabeth?
I believe we were able to hear that. Were you able to finish your comment?
If you heard me request that the list be comprehensive, because high hazard classification confuses a lot of people about what it really means, and so we need the complexity classification as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, are there any other, I don't see any comments in the chat box. Are there other hands raised? Any other folks on the call from the public who would like to make a comment right now? Okay.
All right. Well, good job, Elizabeth. You're better at managing an agenda item than I am, apparently. You were only like 3 or 4 minutes. Good job. Last item is closing remarks. I think I'll keep them really short. I'll just echo what Glenn Wazorek wrapped up with, which was we do want to begin with the end in mind. And I don't want that to be a trite statement, but there's a lot of people on the call, and I'm sure some of this is scary for some people. I'm sure there is a reason that there's a predominance of dam owners on this chart and table. We all recognize what a change to a regulatory program might look like, or I'll say recommendations to it. So bear with us throughout the course of this, and certainly feel free to share. I know a couple of people have already shared concerns about, well, if there's a different regulatory setup, how does that affect my type of ownership or what have you. So duly noted, we appreciate and understand that. Otherwise, I'm going to once again thank the wonderful people from the Association of State Dam Safety Officials, and remind the task force members that we will be getting some communications out to you within the next couple of weeks to better clarify how to do your follow-up commentary and so forth. Your homework between now and a few days before the next meeting, in case we need to incorporate agenda concepts from you, is to read that report. I'm sure folks are eager to get into it. And thanks everyone from the public who has attended to join us today. With that, I'm adjourning our meeting. Thanks very much.